House Speaker Johnson and Senate staff as well are getting briefed today about those mysterious SUV-sized drones spotted in the skies over New Jersey. More drones were reportedly spotted over warships off the West Coast, over nuclear sites across the West, even over the CIA in Langley, Virginia. An official with the White House National Security Council saying there's no evidence the drones are a national security threat or are linked to a foreign government. Joining us now is Democratic New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who serves on the Intelligence Committee. I'm sure you're getting a lot of calls from constituents as well in New York, but this is an issue for the Intelligence Committee. You've asked the FBI and the Homeland Security Department to brief Congress. What do we know so far? What do you know about the drones that you can share?
Well, Andrea, we know very little about these drones, which is the problem. We don't know who is sending them, who's controlling them, whether they are spying, whether they are sighting targets for future action. We have no idea the purpose of these drones, who's controlling them, and whether they are putting the American people at risk.
The Pentagon has denied a claim made by a Republican New Jersey congressman that, quote, an Iranian mothership is behind these drones. That does seem a little far-fetched. Does ease your concerns that they say that there's nothing to that?
Well, I wouldn't say that either, Andrea. We've had drone incursions over Langley for 2 weeks in a row and did not see them coming, did not know where they were from and who was operating them. They're using technology in some of these instances that are unfamiliar. The size of these drones are unusual. It's a size that is not commercially available, or at least readily commercially available. So there's a lot of questions about these UAS. It's important that we look at the laws, because right now some of them are flying over airspace above homes, above schools, above communities, and there's no direct law that denies them to do that. So we need to look at our laws. We need to reform them. We should be able to know their purview, who's controlling them at all times. If it's a foreign adversary flying over places throughout the United States, is illegal. It is something that we can do something about. I'm working with Senator Cotton right now on legislation that when these drone incursions take place over military bases or nuclear sites or sensitive areas, that the DoD will have the authority to take them down. My letter to the FAA and to Homeland Security and to the FBI is asking, what are you doing? Are you going to follow the drones to find out where they're coming from? If there are ships off the coast that are launching these drones, we need to know who is controlling those ships, whether they're foreign adversaries. We know, Andrea, that Iran, that China, that Russia have extremely sophisticated drone capabilities. We've seen drones used as a weapon of war in Ukraine. And so these are the reasons why I have high concerns and am quite dissatisfied by the response by Homeland Security, FBI, and FAA to my request that we need to have answers. They need to know where these drones are coming from. And we cannot simply say, well, they're not causing any harm. Well, do we know that? What are they doing? And who's sending them?
Well, now you have given me a lot of information here. So I should roll back my skepticism about that.
Yeah.
But do you really think that there could be an Iranian mothership that close off the coast of the U.S., the Atlantic coast, let's say, to launch something
there's
that would go over Langley?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's reason to believe that drone incursions that have happened over many months, over the last few years, at different places in the United States could have been launched from ships, particularly if you look at the drone incursions we've seen in Virginia, the drone incursions at Langley, the drone incursions around places that are easily accessible by sea. They need to be launched from somewhere. And so if it's a foreign adversary, a ship might be a very convenient place to launch a drone from. That's why you have to look at these questions. We don't have any evidence of a specific Iranian ship. The DoD has said they don't have any evidence of a specific Iranian ship, but we don't have any evidence that they didn't come from a ship. And then we don't know who's building them and who's flying in them, and we don't know their purpose. So as someone who sits on the Intelligence Committee and Armed Services Committee, that causes me grave concern, because as we know with the Chinese spy balloon, our adversaries have been using our airspace, the lack of regulation in these airspaces, to gather intelligence against us. And because we know that is true, we have to therefore look at any of these drone incursions and ask the simple questions: whose are they and why are they there?
Are you assuming that they are unmanned, or do you think it's possible that they could even be manned drones?
These are, I believe, are unmanned. It seems to be unmanned, although the size is unusual. And the size
That's why I'm asking.
reported. Yeah, the size reported of the drones over Langley were also quite large, but they are being identified as drones, as unmanned aerial systems. So we still believe they're unmanned, but as you know, because you cover war, the drones used in Ukraine have been able to deliver lethal munitions. They're used as a weapon. They're used in many contexts, and they certainly can be used as spycraft, where they gather intelligence, getting signals intelligence, getting reception from cell phone, other digital communications. We know this is feasible, and with the size of the drone, they could carry any payload they wanted to carry, any kind of weapon they would need to carry. So these are questions we should be asking. We should not be looking at these in the way we would look at a kite or a balloon. These are drones, unmanned aerial systems that have been used as weapons of war around the globe. We have adversaries who have high levels of sophistication in manufacturing of drones. We should be asking very serious questions.
When more politicians and politicos and hangers-on and lobbyists and business types find out they can profit off direct corruption, which in some ways is quote-unquote easier than going out and earning an honest buck, well, they do more and more of it. Now, back in the 50s, what I showed you there was the swamp monster from that movie, The Creature from the Black Lagoon. We can leave it up. You can see the special effects might be a little different. Maybe you find that visage of that swamp monster more comical than scary because it's been, 75 years, and we've updated our ability to make scary movies and special effects, although she looks scared. The analogy, though, is how this kind of swampy corruption should be scary to all of us. And there's long been concerns about abuse of power. It's as old as the studies of power. We hear about that term, for example, when it comes to politicians being honest or abusing law enforcement, but what's going on now, and the reason this is our top story tonight, is that some of the richest people in the world are in a position where they can see that it's going to be open season, that they'll be able to police themselves or even beat up on the parts of government, sometimes called the, quote, deep state, that patrols these things, that they can get away with self-dealing with what is sometimes what amounts to graft or corruption, which is something the founders tried to patrol in America. And one of the ways to patrol it, and I'm going to be as clear as possible, one way to patrol it is to punish it after the fact. That's the traditional policing. So when John McCain talked about members of Congress going to prison, and by the way, if a member of Congress, under the fair order of the rule of law and a fair process and a fair jury, is convicted of corruption or self-dealing, stealing your money, abusing your power and the vote you gave them, absolutely they should go to prison. I don't care what party they're in. But that is an after-the-fact effort. Now, we have seen that with Republicans, Trump veterans in the recent era, where they're in trouble sometimes for their business activities, which crossed a line. Trump's first campaign chair in 2016, Republican Paul Manafort, he was ultimately caught up in the investigation from the Mueller probe, and he went to prison partly for those kind of things, corruption crimes. Or the current DOJ got a conviction against a Democrat, Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey. The FBI literally found gold bars in his home, which he couldn't account for. And again, fair process, but he was convicted of corruption for taking those kind of things because he took your vote and the power you gave him, and in the way that Paul Manafort or other Republicans were found guilty, he was found guilty of abusing that. So that's after the fact. Now I'm going to go to step 2, which is you don't always have to sit around and wait for bad stuff to happen. There can be rules to prevent that kind of graft in the first place. So when you hear sometimes these things, these statements or headlines about ethics rules, which frankly sounds a little vague or boring, or you hear about transparency, which is a word that often is misused because we've seen a lot of people who want to do financial and political crime talk about transparency, but the actual honest transparency means that people are empowered through requirements, information, disclosure, and a free and open and fair press that can check in on these things, that through all that process, you find out what your government's up to. Or there are the limits on campaign money. You've probably heard about that. We've had debates over campaign finances for many decades. The Supreme Court over time has recently basically weakened those rules. But all of that tries to prevent this kind of graft before it starts. That's why it matters tonight that the Trump team is planning to further dilute ethics protections. So before we get bogged down in the dry language of that, the reason why I'm showing you the swamp creature, showing you John McCain, reminding you the larger history is those ethics protections are not only good for the country to have an honest government, they're also probably good for those people who don't want to end up like Democrat Menendez or Republican Manafort. Because if we can stop this stuff before it starts, we don't have the financial or corruption crime to begin with. The Trump team, though, is taking a very different tack. They want to make it easier to do self-dealing. They blatantly admit they want to take money from foreign powers, from people who are doing the government business, but also might be doing business on behalf of themselves. And they're giving more power to billionaires who have ongoing interests that cut against or conflict with the general public and taxpayers. Everything I've just said to you is documented. I'm going to show you a little more detail. And everything I've just said to you is nonpartisan, because whether it's Menendez or a Trump campaign chair Manafort, whether it's Elon Musk, a billionaire associated with the right, or some other billionaire Soros associated with the left, if these people are inside government or have their allies inside government doing things for them instead of you, well, that's a violation of the whole point of having a public government and a democracy that represents you. There were protesters who actually were right to warn about this. And what you're seeing on your screen, the sort of creature dropping up, this is not AI. This was a real hearing where the activists put on that mask to try to highlight the so-called swampiness, the creature from the Black Lagoon that I showed you earlier. This was a Senate confirmation for Trump's pick for the very interior job, which I just showed you was later forced out over ethics concerns. You can see the creature over his shoulder.
Just when you thought things couldn't get any wilder in Washington, check this out. At a Senate confirmation hearing, a woman in the background stole the show. She put on a monster mask.
A swamp creature invades Capitol Hill. It's just like the monster from the 1950s classic horror film Creature from the Black Lagoon.
One of them managed to get a prime spot right above Bernhardt's right shoulder, where she appeared during his opening statement and remained for an entire hour.
There was an unexpected viewer in the crowd, a green, unblinking swamp creature watching attentively just over Bernhardt's right shoulder. Wow, just look at the stare.
Very unsettling.
Very unsettling. Now, you could call this a type of artistic or film activism. The point was that just saying dry ethics reform or the ethics rules are diluted or can you believe there's a foreign money provision, yada, 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 all of that can kind of melt and blend into whatever, the ether. But the swamp creature, in a movie that's relevant 75 years and counting, was to spotlight something actually true, the concerns about ethics violations and corruption at Interior. It was, in a sense, a silent visual protest. Trump's family businesses want to directly capitalize on round two of the presidency with new ventures. This isn't just the old Trump org doing whatever it's doing. We're talking about whole new projects built specifically because he's coming back into office. And the Trump ethics structure basically welcomes foreign money. There's a new venture of a Trump Tower in Saudi Arabia. And they're not shy. Eric Trump is publicizing a mock-up design this week as they get ready to return to office. Trump is raising money from his donors, even though he just finished an expensive and victorious campaign. But he's having special meetings, candlelit summits. That's $1 million a person. And over in Silicon Valley, which has had a long arc of evolution around many of these issues, we can see how money follows power, especially in an era where power is so ready to reward everyone with money. Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, CEO now of the parent company Meta, has warmed up to Trump after a very long arc. And remember, Donald Trump has threatened Facebook and Zuckerberg. He's talked about abusing the government powers to go after him, as he has with so many other folks. But like Bezos before him, Zuckerberg cozying up, $1 million now going to Trump's inaugural fund. That donation, the Journal reports, is a departure from Zuckerberg's past practice, comes after an election in which Trump threatened to punish the tech tycoon, and on it goes. Now, these are individuals in the business community who are known for basically one big thing. It's not making good tech. There's plenty of good tech that doesn't make a lot of money. And it's not being brilliant communicators. And it's not having some long-standing multi-decade policy on free speech or other big issues, which you might hear them talk about, but isn't really what they're known for. They're not the ACLU. They're not authors of big tomes on First Amendment jurisprudence. What do? We already know. They're good at making money, and that's fine. That's how business works. But many people in this ethics conversation are scrutinizing these moves because it may seem that these individuals in business expect a return on investment from the new administration, which I'm telling you is doing a lot of self-dealing and was in trouble for graft last time. Zuckerberg put Trump back on Facebook and IG 2 years after the insurrection. Musk brought Trump back to Twitter, known as X, and he has drastically tilted the platform in very obvious ways towards his political views, which, remember, is the exact thing he said was wrong with old Twitter. New Twitter is a more robust, guilty, angry version of Musk's criticism of old Twitter. And again, I'll always tell you, does he have the right to do it? Absolutely. In the United States, if you are a publisher and you own a social media platform or a media platform of traditional writing or video, you can make those choices. I've reported on this before and told you he has that right, but he is doing the opposite of the thing he said he would do. Trump has noticed these embraces. And then you have a tech billionaire who also owns the Washington Post. We have on their reporters as guests. We draw on their reporting. He was reportedly pulling their endorsement of Trump's opponent before the election. You may remember all that. And he's cozying up too, Jeff Bezos.
Mark Zuckerberg's been over to see me, and I can tell you Elon is another, and Jeff Bezos is coming up next week. And I want to get ideas from them. Look, we want them to do well.
I know we've got some other people here, but I don't see Elon Musk. I was hoping because he's been a good, let's say, a good aid to you on a lot of different things.
Well, he's got a lot of ideas. He's a great guy. He's a really good guy, too. And I guess his stock has done pretty well.
True. And the reference there, again, what we're seeing in a kind of a very blatant way is the understanding that the business plan and the political plan are one for the people rich enough to benefit this way. Musk has doubled his wealth since Election Day. He is now the first person in world history to reach $400 billion. If he has a long life, they expect he could be the first trillionaire ever. His ownership stakes are in SpaceX, a private startup worth hundreds of billions. That valuation is directly tied to the company's products, and it does succeed at its products. We're not taking anything away from that, but those products are tied to use by some of the largest governments in the world. It is in business with government contracts to the tune of billions. Investors don't look at this as a conflict of interest. They look at it as an inside track. An advisory group for the current incoming administration is named literally after one of Musk's companies. So they have this government advisory group. It could be called the Tesla Group. It happens to be called the Doge Group, which is his Bitcoin. Bloomberg reports that Trump will streamline the rollout of self-driving cars and eliminate tax credits for electric vehicles that help Tesla. Trump also is staffing his administration with other billionaires. He is not the first administration, to be clear, to draw on the super wealthy or connected, but this seems to be more than just a few. 10 billionaires are now in cabinet-level positions. This is a long ways from Donald Trump's claim to go after the elites and the super rich, to look out for you and drain the swamp.
Joining me now is my colleague and pal, Lawrence O'Donnell, host of The Last Word. I don't even know where to begin. Donald Trump thinks he made up the word groceries, and suddenly people started using the term. But now he says he also cannot lower the price of groceries. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, the thing about this coming presidency that we can actually hope for is that Donald Trump's not going to do what he said he was going to do. Like, if you take the list of things he said he was going to do, most sane people would want him to fail at most of those things. And then the other things, we'd all love him to stop inflation. Just stop it. Yeah. That's impossible. It's never happened. It won't happen. And so that he knows that that's not going to happen. He has no policy. The only policy he came up with that has any direct relationship to inflation is the most inflationary policy a government can come up with, which is tariffs.
Yeah.
He wants the highest tariffs in the 21st century. And actually, they will be the highest tariffs in the history of the United States of America if he gets all of the tariffs that he's talked about. And those are direct price increases. It's like the gasoline tax. You know, when the last time we increased the gasoline tax in this country was 1993, and we increased the gasoline tax federal gasoline tax by 4.3 cents. Now, what do you think happened to the price of gasoline at the pump the next day in America? It went up a nickel everywhere. Then, because it's a commodity and the price fluctuates, you looked at it 2 months later and it was actually down 14 cents from where. But that's real. That 4.3 cents is in there in the federal part of the tax, and it costs you. A tariff is exactly the same thing. It's a tax applied not at the moment where you buy the TV at Best Buy.
Yeah.
Best Buy has already paid the tax called a tariff at the port where that Samsung TV arrived in the port of Los Angeles. Best Buy paid, in Trump's case, the $100 TV. Donald Trump wants to make that TV cost $160. He wants a 60% tariff on that TV. So at the port in L.A., Best Buy will pay $160 for the TV, $100 for the TV plus $60. Then it'll bring it into the store. And Donald Trump wants you to believe they'll bring it into the store after paying $160 for it and sell it for $100. That's what he told his voters, and his voters believe it because they literally do not know what a tariff is.
Well, and they don't, and it's interesting because like in like 4th grade, we learned about the Boston Tea Party, which was a literal war we fought with England about tariffs.
Yeah, so wait, let me get this straight. That's not just a Boston thing, right? Because I knew what a tariff was growing up in Boston when I was in 4th grade.
Yeah, that's what we learned, right? Because the Boston Tea Party, tariff. But I mean, the thing is that you know that, I know that. The thing that you hear the reaction from Trump voters when they're interviewed about this is they say, oh, well, just buy American. You can't just suddenly create a
as
TV.
An American TV.
Right.
Good luck. Go out right now and go buy an American TV.
Zenith
we don't make them.
Yeah.
We don't make them anymore.
Yeah.
So, by the way, there's no such thing as an American cup of coffee. Okay, there's a
not.
little bit of coffee grown in Hawaii, a tiny bit. It's the most expensive coffee in the world. Yeah. Every other cup of coffee you've ever had in your life came from a foreign country.
Colombia, Jamaica, Nigeria, African continent. Okay, so here the other piece is, okay, what Donald Trump is saying in the Time magazine interview that he wants to focus on, because he says, you know, I really can't lower the price of things, surprise to my voters. He says he wants to do something like, let's say, get rid of education. He says, what do you plan to do? This is Time magazine. I mean, I'll give you an example. We want to move the schools back to the states. This is also not going to reduce prices of things. What does moving back to the states mean? Doesn't that mean closing the education department? A virtual closure of Department of Education in Washington. Virtual closure? Well, you're going to need some people, Trump says, to just make sure they're teaching English in the schools. Okay, you know, English and mathematics, let's say. But we want to move education back to the states. If you look at the states, if you look at some of the individual countries, Norway is very strong. He loves Norway. I think Iowa and Indiana, a lot of these states are strong. And then he goes on about Norway and stuff like that. Education's already in the states.
It's actually, of course, it's even more local than that, right? It's like California doesn't pay for the Los Angeles school district.
Right.
Los Angeles does. New York City pays for its own schools. Albany's not paying for the New York City schools. There's elements of cost sharing and there's elements of federal subsidies to all of this. But the federal piece of public education in America is 7%. If you zero it out, that you're going to be taking 7 pennies away out of the dollar. They're not going to zero it out because it's there through an act of Congress, not through an act of the presidency. The Department of Education was not created by a president. It was created by Congress. You cannot eliminate the Department of Education without a vote of Congress, which isn't going to happen. There won't even be a bill introduced to eliminate the Department of Education. None of this is going to happen. Nothing. There won't be a single change in public education in America because of the Trump presidency or because of Elon Musk wandering around the budget of the United States.
But Lawrence, wait, you're wrong about that because the surgeries that are being performed for trans kids in schools, those are going to stop on day one. He's going to stop those surgeries that are happening between 3rd and 4th grade.
You mean those kids that he talks about who go to school in the morning, come home a different gender,
correct, that's
without
stopping.
The school telling
the period between gym
I think
and
they
lunch,
will get control of that.
They're going to get that under control.
You know, I've discovered that on cable news, when you joke, you have to identify the joke.
That it was, we were joking.
So that's a joke. In fact, that does not happen already in American schools.
It does not. You know that. I know that. But the people that you used to work for in the United States Senate, they also know that. And yet what you're seeing is senators capitulating in advance and essentially saying, yes, sir, we will take the knee to, sir, whatever you want, sir, including this bizarre cabinet. It's like a Star Wars bar cabinet.
Well, so not
and
yet.
They're just conceding.
So they haven't done it yet. It's so interesting to watch. Here's the way to watch this confirmation process. There's only one thing you care about, and it apparently is very hard to teach this to the political press. You care about Senate vote counts, the number, okay? So Pete Hegseth does not have 51 votes as of tonight. And this may come as a surprise to readers of the New York Times. He also does not have Joni Ernst's vote, even though the New York Times did a massive story today about how Donald Trump has resuscitated the Pete Hegseth nomination, and they didn't identify a single senator who has become a yes vote to create a majority vote. And when you get down to the final sentence of the article, you discover, oh, wait, they put it in very blurred language. Maybe Joni Ernst hasn't made up her mind yet. And she hasn't.
Yeah.
And so when a senator comes out and says, as she did, I support the process, she supports the confirmation process, the New York Times treats that as a change of position for Joni Ernst. Here's how you change your position. You say, yes, I'm voting yes. Watch Lindsey Graham. He brings every one of them into his office and dances with them and says how he's going to vote. That's a yes. Okay, Lindsey Graham's what a yes looks like. Mitch McConnell has not said yes. Susan Collins has not said yes. They're not even close to 50 yeses.
But here's the thing. I think the reason that I personally believe they're going to put them all through is you talked about Mitch McConnell. Here's the level of courage, okay, of Mitch McConnell, somebody who could not bring himself to vote to impeach someone that he himself believes was guilty because he keeps giving interviews that let you know what he thinks of him. This is what he said to the Financial Times, literally within the last few days. We're in a very, very dangerous world right now. Reminiscent of before World War II, says McConnell. Even the slogan is the same, America First. Well, that was what they said in the 1930s. Well, thanks a lot, Mr. McConnell, who's done literally nothing to stop us from going back to the 30s and who has literally whipped votes to save Trump from himself when he couldn't have done the opposite. That is the level of courage we're expecting against Pete Hegseth. I wouldn't count on it.
I wouldn't count on it. However, it could be that in the final 2 years, and we're entering the final 2 years of Mitch McConnell's career in the Senate, he's not in the leadership anymore. He's just a senator.
And a lame duck.
Kentucky senator voting on everything. There's a possibility that Mitch McConnell, becomes the new Mitt Romney. It is entirely possible that Mitch McConnell will vote against Pete Hegseth and will vote against a bunch of
Kash
these.
Patel?
Absolutely. It is entirely possible. Tulsi Gabbard. That is very. There's no question that the Mitch McConnell prior to Donald Trump in our politics would have voted against every one of these people.
Of course.
Absolutely.
So would have Lindsey Graham.
Even if proposed by former President Bush. No question about it. And so we're going to find out. He says, McConnell says he feels liberated.
Yeah.
We're going to find out on the first confirmation vote how liberated Mitch McConnell is, and everyone's going to be watching. And I have high hopes. I am going to maintain high hopes until those hopes are formally crushed with an actual vote on the Senate floor.
I appreciate it because, look, my name is Joy, but you're the one who actually brings the joy.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We are currently in something of a weird period these days, don't you think? On one track, the daily news out of Washington is the normal process of American governance and specifically transition between different administrations. It's the kind of thing you might expect after any election when the White House changes parties. Elected Democrats are out there acting like everything is normal. You may recall that President Joe Biden hosted Trump for a friendly fireside chat in the Oval Office last month. Democratic Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania made some news saying that he now supports Elise Stefanik to be Trump's UN ambassador because he supports her position on Israel. Democratic Governor Jared Polis of Colorado praised R.F. Kennedy Jr. as Trump's choice to run the Department of Health and Human Services. And a whole bunch of Democrats are paying lip service to Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's fake department to slash spending by unprecedented levels. From a lot of national Democrats, the message has been, well, the people spoke it, and now we're going to get about the business of governing under Trump. And I kind of get it. I mean, all of this used to be very fairly standard stuff after an election, even a close election, very close election like this one. And there's also a very similar vibe from the titans of industry. Tech billionaires are popping up all over the place trying to curry favor with the once and future president. We just learned that Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, donated a cool $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund after meeting with him at Mar-a-Lago. Not to be outdone, we're learning tonight that Jeff Bezos' company, Amazon, is also donating $1 million to the inauguration. Bezos also says he looks forward to working with Trump.
If we're talking about Trump, I think it's very interesting. I'm actually very optimistic this time around that we're going to see. I'm very hopeful about this. He seems to have a lot of energy around reducing regulation. And my point of view, if I can help him do that, I'm going to help him, because we do have too much regulation in this country.
By the way, after he said that, an article out today that they're thinking about getting rid of the FDIC, which is the New Deal institution that ensures bank deposits for everyone. That's a regulation. Might say goodbye to that one. Now, okay, in terms of Bezos and Zuckerberg and even Democrats, I have seen this movie before, right? Rich people currying favor with a powerful president. But the thing is that this isn't before, and Trump is different. I'm not imagining it, and you're not. What is so disturbing, enraging, alienating about everyone who's doing this, the capitulation of Trump, is that it just fundamentally ignores the gaping wound in American democracy. A wound that is just sitting there festering while everyone just goes about business as usual. One of the two major parties in this country, and we only have two, has withdrawn from the consensus of democratic governance and rejected the peaceful transfer of power. Now, right now, it looks like that wound has been healed because the party that has withdrawn from that consensus, the Republicans, happened to win this last election. And because Democrats really do believe in American democracy and preserving democracy, they accepted those results. We didn't get a whole bunch of lawsuits. We didn't get a big lie. We're certainly not rushing headlong towards a violent insurrection in the Capitol, right? So, hey, everything's fine. No, but the wound has not been healed. The problem has not been solved. For one thing, Donald Trump, the incoming president, is just as committed to the big lie and the January 6th coup as he ever was.
For the sake of unifying this country, will you concede the 2020 election and turn the page on that chapter?
No. No. Why would I do that?
You promised to pardon those who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. Are you still vowing to follow through with that promise?
We're looking at it right now, most likely, yeah. I'm going to look at everything. We're going to look at individual cases, yeah.
Okay.
But I'm going to be acting very quickly.
Within your first 100 days, first day?
First day.
What's more, the incoming administration is instituting loyalty tests to make sure that the folks working in his administration, I mean, and that's hundreds, thousands of people, also support his election lies. A recent New York Times report details the interview process at the Trump transition offices. Quote, the interviewers ask which candidate the applicants had supported in the three most recent elections, what they thought about the events of January 6, 2021, and whether they believe the 2020 election was stolen. The sense they got was that there was only one right answer for each question. I laughed at that line in the article, like, what did you think of January 26, 2020? Oh, what's the right answer? Like, cool, awesome. I love that one moment where they dragged the cop and they just started beating on him. For at least one of Trump's would-be employees, you don't even need to ask those questions. You guys remember Kari Lake? We're not done with her yet. Kari Lake is the person that Donald Trump wants to lead the Voice of America, which, by the way, is the government state media network. It's the largest and oldest sort of public media in the country. She is the politician perhaps most closely linked to the big lie outside, of course, Trump himself. Lake, get this, not only insists that Trump won the 2020 election, she also insists she won her own 2022 race to be governor of Arizona, which she didn't win. She lost to Katie Hobbs. The Democrat who beat Lake in Arizona's Senate race last month, again, she lost twice in 2 years, Ruben Gallego, compiled some helpful examples of her own big lie for voters.
I am the duly elected governor. Our victory was stolen from us.
I want what I earned. I want to be the governor of Arizona.
I am the governor. I believe I won.
They stole this election, and every man, woman, and child knows it.
These bastards back there don't want us talking about stolen elections.
Will you accept the results of your election in November?
I'm going to win the election, and I will accept that result.
That's actually a pretty good, succinct articulation of the ethos, right? Of Trump and Lake and all of them. If they win, they accept it. Otherwise, no. Now, it's not exactly clear if Trump can actually install Lake as the head of the VOA because there's like a board of governors, but he doesn't care. He's certainly going to try. And Lake would no doubt use every facet of her power to push election lies and kind of create a domestic version of Russia's infamous state media apparatus. Lake believes, perhaps more than anyone else, in the core tenet of the Republican Party. Elections only count when we win them. And again, this is not isolated. I can't stress enough. We are actually seeing this play out in real terms, legislatively right now in the state of North Carolina. Last month, Trump won North Carolina at the top of the ticket, but Democrats did pretty well down ballot. Remember, Democrat Josh Stein won the gubernatorial race by 15 points, defeating Republican nominee Mark Robinson. That was the guy who reportedly frequented a porn forum called Nude Africa, where he apparently referred to himself as a black Nazi. Didn't go over great with the voters. Robinson denies all that, by the way, but the voters seem to believe it. Anyway, there was also Democrat Jeff Jackson. He's a congressman who was gerrymandered by the state Republicans out of his seat and then won the race to be the state's next attorney general. Democrats won 2 of the top jobs in North Carolina politics, governor, attorney general, fair and square. But North Carolina Republicans don't accept it. So they are pushing the state in this bizarro world, engaging in a kind of legislative coup in the lame duck session after the elections. They lost their supermajority in the gerrymandered state legislature last month, a gerrymandered legislature they themselves created and was challenged often in court. They're in a lame duck session right now before that supermajority goes away. And in those waning days, having been voted out of office, they just overrode a governor's veto to force through a bill that strips power away from, guess who? Those newly elected Democrats, governor and attorney general, and hands it to, guess who? Republican officials instead. They lost the election. Like, I don't know, you shouldn't have maybe not nominated the Nude Africa guy? But they lost, and then they didn't accept it, and they gave themselves power anyway. Believe you me, if they had lost the presidential race in November, where do you think we'd be right now? Maybe having buddy-buddy fireside chats? They would be trying to steal the election at the national level, too, obviously. That's the gaping wound. The rejection of this fundamental thing you kind of need an agreement on. The rejection of democracy, it's still there. And Democrats keep kissing up to Trump or bending the knee because, I don't know, they want to seem reasonable, because they're spooked by the fact he won a majority and they want to win over voters, because they agree with him on Israel and supporting the Netanyahu government's claim to all the land between the river and the sea, or they like the idea of cutting government spending. Look, it's not going to address the problem. My strong belief, and I've been wrong before, but my strong belief is that all these people, particularly Democratic leaders, trying to will us towards normalcy by acting like everything is normal, are in for a rude awakening.
Well, as we enter the confirmation hearing season, it is worth remembering that there is only one word that matters in reporting about the confirmation process. That word is yes. When a reporter asks a senator if that senator is going to vote for a nominee, if that senator does not say the word yes, that senator is not yet voting for the nominee. It is possible that that senator will eventually decide to vote for the nominee, especially Republican senators who are now being subjected to unprecedented levels of pressure and intimidation to vote for Trump nominees. There have been discussions on cable news this week and articles published that say, for example, Republican Senator Joni Ernst has changed her position on the Pete Hegseth nomination to be Secretary of Defense. The first nominee for a cabinet position in history who has pledged to stop drinking if and only if He is confirmed by the United States Senate. The New York Times published a report, well-sourced within the Trump transition team, but without any apparent sources in the United States Senate, about what the headline calls the resurrection of support for Pete Hegseth's confirmation. But the only resurrection that actually reports on is the resurrection of Donald Trump's personal support for Pete Hegseth after Donald Trump's apparent attempt to abandon Pete Hegseth. The Times reports Mr. Trump was getting sick of hearing about it all, and he told confidants he was serious about picking Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida to replace him. But within 48 hours, Mr. Trump had changed his mind. He was going to see if Mr. Hegseth could survive. Trump allies appear to compete in that article for credit in reviving the Hegseth nomination. J.D. Vance is obviously trying to be seen in that article as helping Hegseth, as is Steve Bannon and other Trump-worshiping private citizens with microphones. But no access to United States senators is reported in the article. This long, authoritative article describes the intense pressure being put on United States senators by right-wing media, paid for advertising by Elon Musk, and threats of a Republican primary challenge against any Republican senator who votes against Pete Hegseth. But the article does not describe the conversion of a single Republican senator to a yes vote. And even though Joni Ernst has not changed to a yes vote, the Times does describe what it calls Joni Ernst turnaround. That's the word they used for it. A turnaround for Joni Ernst would have been going from expressing concern about the nomination of someone accused of rape in a Monterey, California police report, someone who opposes women serving in combat, which is understandably offensive to Joni Ernst, who served in combat herself. Joni Ernst is actually the first woman elected to the United States Senate who was a combat veteran. A turnaround for Joni Ernst would be telling the New York Times or anyone publicly that she is a yes vote for Pete Hegseth. Here is the way the Times describes the turnaround that turns out not to be a turnaround, but simply a semantic adjustment to deflect pressure. Quote, a week ago, Ms. Ernst seemed as if she would not be able to get to yes on Mr. Hegseth. She said that he would have his work cut out for him. But after a few days of intense pressure, her comments this week could not have been more different. Quote, as I support Pete through this process, I look forward to a fair hearing based on truth, not anonymous sources, Ms. Ernst said in a statement on Monday after a meeting with Mr. Hegseth. This article appeared in Thursday morning's edition, today's edition of the New York Times. And it's using a written statement put out by Joni Ernst on Monday. The Times could have used more recent statements made by Senator Ernst. They'd still be 4 days old, but these statements were made in real discussion with reporters, not just on a piece of paper, and they were made after Joni Ernst issued that written statement. The Times could have reported what Senator Ernst actually said after she issued that written statement saying that she supports Pete through this process. It would be absolutely fair for any New York Times reader of that article to believe that the phrase support Pete through this process means she is voting yes, especially when the New York Times tells you that that comment, quote, could not have been more different, end quote, from what she had said last week. But in fact, it could have been a lot more different from what she said last week. Joni Ernst could have said, I am a yes vote for Pete Hegseth. Instead, all she seemed to be saying was that she supports the confirmation process. Every senator who's going to vote against Pete Hegseth's confirmation supports the confirmation process. Capitol Hill reporters who cover senators every day know what a senator sounds like when they support a nominee instead of supporting a process. In fact, Here's what Joni Ernst sounds like when she supports a nominee. The very same day that she said in writing that she supports Pete through this process, Joni Ernst said, "I know Kash, and that's why I think he's going to be great. We really do need people who will go in and shake up some of these organizations." So you can put Senator Joni Ernst down as a yes vote for Kash Patel for director of the FBI as of now, as of tonight. But even that yes vote could become a no vote if Kash Patel has as bad a confirmation hearing as he is capable of having in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Joni Ernst has not said anything like that about Pete Hegseth. She has never said, "I think Pete is going to be great." Reporters who have covered the confirmation process before know that the key word to listen for is yes. That's the word you have to hear. And they all know that as of now, Pete Hegseth is not close to getting 51 yes votes in the United States Senate. On Monday, after Senator Ernst released her written statement about supporting Pete through the process, in which she was obviously trying to deflect all of that intense pressure that Donald Trump's allies have been putting on her in her home state of Iowa, reporters following her through the hallways of the Senate wanted to know what her written statement actually meant, because to them it meant nothing. None of those experienced reporters believed that that written statement was a turnaround for Joni Ernst. When the reporters asked her what the written statement actually meant, she could have easily said, "It means I'm voting yes to confirm Pete Hegseth." She did not come close to saying that.
Absolutely. It means that we're having really good discussions, and we discussed several items that were really important to me, and I'll just refer back to my statement on those items. But what I appreciated very much about Mr. Hegseth who came in, he really does respect the process, and I'm grateful for that. But again, I'll refer you back to my statement.
Are you confident his denials about those assault allegations? Do you believe those denials?
I'll refer you back to this statement.
Do you believe his denials about the sexual assault allegations? It would have been a turnaround for Joni Ernst to say, "Yes, I believe his denials." She did not say that. She wants reporters and people in Iowa to focus only on her written statement in order to get the Trump pressure off her, and only the New York Times decided to limit its reporting exactly the way Joni Ernst wants them to limit their reporting, by quoting only her written statement. Experienced reporters in the Senate hallway wisely were not falling for the written statement.
Will you have another meeting with him? That's to be determined, but thank you.
You talked about emotion in your statement. What does that mean? Can you provide more details?
Yes, and we talked through a number of issues that the Pentagon has right now, and it was a very thoughtful and deep conversation about several items that I'd already talked to him about, and it was good to have a real thorough policy discussion.
Did the pressure of getting back home and primary politics play into this?
We have been talking these same issues every meeting that we've had, and he had really thoughtful answers, so thank you.
Did the pressure you're getting back home in the primary politics play into this? The obvious answer is yes. That pressure is what provoked her to deliver the written statement. But that pressure has not yet turned her vote into a yes vote. It might eventually. That pressure might eventually turn Joni Ernst into a yes vote for Pete Hegseth. But the correct way to frame Joni Ernst's position as of tonight is, despite the most enormous pressure on an individual senator by her party in a Senate confirmation vote in history, Joni Ernst is still not a yes vote for Donald Trump's choice for Secretary of Defense. Joni Ernst could make all the pressure completely disappear tomorrow just by saying that one word, yes. And she has not said that word. The Times delivered very valuable reporting on inside the pressure process the Trump world is dumping on Joni Ernst, but limiting that reporting to the vote of just one senator, which is still not a yes vote, ignores other Republican senators who are also not yet yes votes for Pete Hegseth. Senator Susan Collins, Senator Lisa Murkowski, Senator Mitch McConnell, Senator Deb Fischer. There are a total of at least 5 Republican senators who are not tonight a yes vote for Pete Hegseth, and it only takes 4. Only takes 4 Republicans to kill that nomination in the United States Senate. So the truth is, yes, there is an attempt to resurrect the Pete Hegseth nomination, but as of tonight, it hasn't worked, and Pete Hegseth still does not have the votes to be confirmed as Secretary of Defense. And Donald Trump's nominee for Director of the FBI, Kashif Patel, also does not yet have the votes to be confirmed in the United States Senate. You can be sure that in his confirmation hearing, Kash Patel will try to reverse his position on eliminating the intelligence unit of the FBI, which current FBI Director Chris Wray says has stopped several terrorist plots in this country.
The FBI's footprint has gotten so freaking big, and the biggest problem the FBI has come out of its intel shops. I'd break that component out of it. I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening the next day as a museum of the deep state.
And in his Senate confirmation hearing, Kash Patel will probably try to claim that this was just a joke.
We're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out.